There are some subjects that kind of drain me a little bit, if I can be really honest. This one this morning is some of what I'll share this morning. I'm always glad when it's over. But when I was assigned this topic, this is what materialized. When I got into this topic of when I need forgiveness, at first I thought, man, I got this. And then I started, it was like herding cats to try to come up with something that would fit into 25 minutes. And so if it sounds like that, then you just pray for me, okay? One of our students came here to school thinking that only perfect people get to do ministry. I've come to understand, or let me just say this, if you have that mindset, it would be easy for you to think that the only way you can ever do anything for Jesus is when you get perfect enough. I've come to understand that brokenness and greatness run parallel in the same life. Okay? All right. The truth is, as I look back over my life, honestly, if I'd been God, I think I understand more and more as I look back over my life. I would have hung a closed for remodeling sign on my life. So many times that you couldn't count. But God didn't see it that way. And he keeps giving me assignments and things to do, including speaking here this morning. And the reality is, you have to keep pedaling the bicycle while God's working on you. Here's the beautiful thing about grace. That the Lord doesn't lock our brokenness away in a room to hide it, but he actually heals it. And then instead of it being a disqualifier, he actually uses your past, uses your background, and partners with you to reach people that others can't. Okay? We have this treasure in a fragile vase of clay, in order that the surpassing greatness of the power may be seen to belong to God and not to originate in us. So my topic is when I need to be forgiven. When I was talking with my wife this morning, she said, so which direction are you taking it? I said, if you'll let me read this paragraph to you, this is where I'm going, okay? My experience is that usually when I need to be forgiven, something inside me needs to be confronted and changed. God has a deeper work in mind in shaping me into who he sees I need to become, and I can become. Okay? Thank God. The hurt that my life is causing to others is coming out of my own story that needs to change. Now, my remarks this morning are not just a series of sad stories about personal failure, but I hope what you get is that they are ultimately about the power of God's grace to break the change of generational cycles of dysfunction. One of God's most powerful tools for change is when we see ourselves in somebody else's story. So, talking about these generational cycles, my story began in a home where my mother was physically abusive and emotionally and mentally traumatizing. My home was unreliable and unsafe. If I had to choose a body language way of describing how I felt growing up, it would have been like this: staying hypervigilant. My early memories of church are warm moments sitting with my dad. His arm was around my shoulder, hand hanging down, and I'm playing with his fingers. And it was a rare, beautiful moment because I didn't get much time with my dad. He was very busy. And in church, though, I got to snuggle up right next to him. My mom dropped out of church first. I never quite knew what happened. Politics, church board issues, bitterness, gossip. But Dad kept going. And then I suppose he just got worn down by Mom not going, and then he quit going. And so some of the most impressionable years of my life were spent on the back seat of the church, cutting up, distracting the service, and regularly slipping out for a cigarette at prayer time. Looking back, one of the shaping moments of my young years happened, though, while my mom was still in church. By the way, I could never understand how my mother could act like she did at home, and then when there was altar calls, she would lean up and lean on the pew ahead of her, and she'd say things like, "Help him, Jesus, help him, Jesus." And I didn't have to be very sophisticated with a theology degree to be scratching my head saying, "Help him, Jesus." The way you act? And so one night, while Mom was still in church, I went to the altar as a little 7 or 8-year-old boy, and I think the altar call was for entire sanctification. And if so, I doubt I knew all the theological ramifications of what I was seeking. But I was a little kid who wanted to go up front, seek Jesus, and be a good boy. And we were about a mile from the church on our way home with me in the back seat of our car when something happened that triggered my mother to turn around from the front and say, "I don't know what you think you got at that altar, but you didn't get anything." And Mom belittled a little boy seeking God, and apparently God didn't hear me. And I had no worth, no respect as an individual. By the time I had hardened into an adult and left home for Bible college, I had this crippling, brittle bitterness at my mother. On an emotional scale of 1 to 10, Mom was about a 3 for me. She wasn't very high on the scale. Hallmark card was a trial for me, as probably some of you can understand if you've been in my shoes, where I'd have to spend way too much time trying to sort through the cards, trying to find something that was truthful and still be able to send my mom a card. I want to say this morning, not only to parents, but I want to say it to those of you students this morning. Parents have the power to paint who God is to their kids. From a young age, there are 1,000 tiny brushstrokes on the canvas of our heart that paint the image of what God must be like. And one of the things that we do from our childhood is just kind of map over on God, kind of slowly bake into the image that we form of God the flaws, the inconsistencies, and even the sins of our father and our mother. And when that image is basically a right one, it makes it far easier to trust the Lord.
It's true.
I have to tell you, I envy people that I see have such a free and trusting and open relationship towards God. I've had to work for it. When our kids live with hurtful and demeaning and careless attitudes, and in some cases even serious moral decay in Christian homes, preachers can stand up here and urge them to give God your all, but they can't bring themselves to trust their life to a God who's been represented as unsafe and inconsistent. Because you can't help but live out your life from the image of God you have in your heart.
That's so true.
Sadly, that dysfunctional norm that I just painted for you, I didn't have to lift a finger for it to be baked into my life at home. And I didn't have to even try for it just to follow me into my home, my marriage, my parenting. I remember one time going down the road with my family in the car, and I was yelling at the kids. And my wife was pleading with me not to yell at the kids. May have been some kind of conversation around, that's not right or that's not normal. And I honestly replied, this is normal. Because it was. I started marriage as an emotionally detached guy, to the point that I couldn't even feel sympathy for other people. In fact, I distinctly remember early on in our marriage, because of the tenderness of my wife, that emotion of sympathy waking up for the first time in my mind and heart. It was new to feel sorry for other people when they hurt. Honestly, if a kid would have fallen over on a bicycle, I wouldn't have felt anything. The destructive words and behaviors and physical abuse that started in my young years, that led to my emotional woundedness and my wrong view of who God is and my wrong view of who I needed to be in order to survive, followed me into my home life as an adult and became a story of how I, as a dad and as a husband, went on to cause emotional woundedness and a wrong view of God, of who God is, and conditioned my kids to develop with a wrong view of who they needed to be in order to survive. God has blessed Linda and I with 4 beautiful kids, and I thank God for them. 11 grandkids and 2 on the way, and if you want to see pictures afterwards, just let me know. In 5 days, I'll have a 40-year-old. The story of our family was like a lot of homes. It was filled with crazy fun times and family vacations and really happy memories. My kids loved my job here and the adventures that it allowed them to take with me. We had a ton of good times together, whether it was cranking up the music and going down the main drag in Gatlinburg with the windows open, or camping in tents with family music around the fire. In so many respects, our story was one of the normal family. But the problem is that our normal, no matter how common it might even be among some of our church families, was not acceptable by God's vision and standard for families.
True.
Day-to-day life for my kids was happy times offset by an undercurrent of not knowing which moment might be the next reactive moment. The tension came from the unexpected bad days, days that for the kids were marked by the pain and frustration of not being heard and valued and respected individually, times that would bring them to the brink of bitterness. My oldest daughter, Amber, had been out of the house probably for several years by this time, and her and my similar personalities were no longer grinding under the same roof. She was away from the tension, and we'd really developed a nice relationship that was working. And I loved going to Amber's home and spoiling her kids and being grandpa and enjoying her baked goods. But unseen to me, no matter how many times I would affirm Amber, she had a hard time reconciling the compliment she was receiving now, grown up and married, with her memories of things I had said at home. And I had no clue that the compliments that I gave her as a married daughter were still being filtered through some of the careless words I said when she lived at home. While I was thinking that the past was the past and everything was fine, we moved on, I didn't realize it that Amber was actually seeing a professional Christian counselor who advised her that she write down some of those shaping moments, sort of a collage of painful incidents that still lingered in her mind. And so she sat down and gave voice to them as if she was writing to me. She wrote with the idea that this was just for herself and her own journey towards wholeness. She wrote this just to get it off her chest without knowing if she would ever even send it to me. As far as Amber knew, I was never going to read it, but she needed to do it in order to kind of process through, work through the conflict that she had inside. But when she finished the letter, she felt prompted to email it to me as her dad. She and her husband Darren prayed over it as it sat queued in her email outbox, and then in a moment of intense emotion she will never forget, she pressed send. I was over here in my office, I think working in the evening, and got an email, subject line, "Love you, Dad." And then going back to that evening, here are the words it began with. "Dear Dad, well, where to start? I thought it would be a good idea to get some thoughts out of hiding and onto paper, but I've been putting it off for a while now. Just seems silly since you may or may not read it anyway. Randomness bouncing around in my head, ending in my stomach, a tight knot of sad, hurt, lonely, longing feelings. When I'm tempted to think about this stuff long enough to cry it out, I choke it back. What good are tears anyway? You always told me that they were just being used to manipulate you into doing what I wanted. So crying is weak and manipulating, for me at least. There are so many things I just want to scream at you. Why scream? Well, they're just that passionately ingrained, and secondly, that's the way you communicate best, right? Loud, yelling, pounding. Why do we have to tiptoe around you? You are too scared and stubborn to admit that you may need help other than prayer. Sure, God could miraculously fix your own scars, emotional, physical abuse, and regrets, but has he? Does he always fix things like we hope? No. Sometimes we need to be open to the greater picture and what can be accomplished through it. Well, I don't know about you, but I haven't always known when I needed to be forgiven. I think my topic sort of presupposes almost a little bit like when I need to be forgiven. If I polled people here this morning, I bet you there's a lot of other people that don't even know what you've done. There are times when it's as plain as the nose on my face that I need to make things right. But there have been times that something about my life has hurt someone else and I had no clue that I had hurt them, or I thought it was resolved, only to find out by surprise that I needed to be forgiven. We tend to create a storyline about our life that doesn't always match reality. Sometimes there's a narrative that we have going about ourselves that can be so different than what others have experienced from us. It's hard to face facts about myself that I know but don't like. But it's incredibly difficult to be hit with facts about my life that I don't know, or I think are in the past and done with, the blind spots in my life. Reading Amber's email was an emotional bombshell for me. Yesterday was so yesterday. I mean, today's reality was reality. And for me, the past was a fuzzy memory of forgotten boxes. For her, it was a collage of experiences that she could no longer avoid, and they hit me all at once. A lot of us discount how important we are in the lives of others. How much our opinion, our involvement, what we say, impacts and even shapes the hard drive of others. We stuff the bad times into a box with no label on it, store it away quickly after it happens or after we've apologized again. To those with families here this morning, and really in a general application, you never know which words your kids will keep. Which words are going to shape their self-image and their image of God long after you've vented your stress and took your day out on them and forgotten what you said. And our kids carry these wounds into adult relationships, and then they act out of those wounds when they get hurt. I can't resist just saying right now, I understand the cynicism about some of the delving into the emotional and the psychological and the physical aspects of our woundedness. But I will tell you this, that we're not one-dimensional. And any honest look at our need and any honest look at the possibilities of grace have to take in the whole man.
True.
It's amazing how God uses pain, like Amber's letter, to amplify his voice to us, to bring clarity and healing into our life. The most well-known of all Jesus' parables is his story about a father and his two sons, and the younger of which makes a stunning and disrespectful request for his inheritance before he heads off on his own. We all know the story. The prodigal spends all of his inheritance on reckless, sinful living and eventually hits rock bottom. He decides that his father's servants are better off than he is, so he composes a confession that he's going to make to his father, asking to be one of his servants. And I just want to stop right there to say this. You know, scripting what you're going to say in difficult circumstances is pretty wise. And he scripted it. Boy, has he changed. The kid that ran off with the inheritance now is thinking through what he's going to say to his dad. When you're heading into a difficult situation, thank God in these days that you have so much available support. And it is so important for you to get help in what you're going to say and how you're going to approach even an apology in some difficult circumstances. Script it. Tell yourself how you're going to act, what your body language is going to be, what your words are going to be for the first 15 minutes. And then your heart will take you on through most of the rest of it. So, while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. I get the sense that this dad has been looking for his son's return perhaps every day, and when he sees him, he's just filled with compassion. I love this. It's a challenge to me. This is no small detail, because in the world of Jesus' day, the father had the right to take his son before the elders and have him stoned, maybe even to death. No one would have questioned the father had he done this. Justice would have been served. But instead, the father ran to him, hugs him, and kisses him, welcomes him home, throws him a party. The father had to be grieved over his son's choices. He didn't endorse or overlook his son's reckless living. Any good father would have been rightly upset by the actions of that younger son, but that didn't prevent his father from loving him. But the nugget that's been standing out to me as I was getting ready for this morning, the nugget in that prodigal story for me is in verse 17, where it says, he finally came to his senses.
Right.
Boy, do I find myself there. I think one of the hardest things about me having to tell some of these stories is, how in the world do you make sense out of that? How is the guy not a fraud when he was in public relations and knew how to be nice to people, but thank God for his grace. I mean, if spiritual formation for me has been like God peeling back one onion layer at a time, when I got Amber's letter, it might have been like about half an onion peeled back at a time, you know? What I don't want to give the impression of this morning is you should find a place this next Sunday morning to get up and tell your vulnerable story. be almost glad if God doesn't lay it on your heart to do it. Okay, just don't go there. Number two, not everybody has a right to hear your story even in private.
Right.
Okay?
That's good.
Also, if you want to keep your friends, don't burden them down every time you get around them with your problems. Even my dear wife. I mean, I told somebody the other day, I said, our wives don't need to hear all our stuff. That's why we need some guy friends and why we need, someplace to shoot the breeze so that poor lady doesn't have her bridge buckle under all the load of my day and my life and all that, But man, when Amber sent me that letter, you talk about coming to your senses. And my first senses were not to drop to my knees in my office over here and start a 21-day fast with an instantly humbled heart, realizing the enormity of what I'd done. No. I was scared because I didn't read you the whole letter. I was angry. I was confused. I was alone. I went down to Findlay Market and just bumped into things. I went to Starbucks and just sat there. I was dazed for like 3 days. Okay? God used pain to bring me to my senses, and to open my eyes in a much deeper way to the changes that needed to take place in my life. And out of all of this journey that started about 11 years ago, almost to the day, for me, okay, I've learned this. In order to be some spiritual guy, I don't have to go around talking about how I've arrived. I'm arriving.
That's good.
There are definite points of definite works by God in my life that I can point back to that are buttoned down, and God did it in a moment, and you can't take it away from me.
Praise God.
But a whole lot of life is just, whoa. Like even now, I'm like, wow, I'll get this deeper sense of, we'll lay this term on you, emotional intelligence, and that really is what it is in spiritual intelligence about, whoa, man, what I did to those kids. Yelling at the kids and whipping them too hard. And, whoa. Why? Because grace is healing my story. Grace is turning me at my core into somebody that can actually feel that. And the more I can feel it, the more I can empathize. And I think I'll be feeling more and more and more, not in a debilitating way. In fact, my son was sitting in my house the other day. He said, Dad, I prayed about this. He doesn't live at our house, obviously, but he's like, Dad, I prayed about this, and I'm going to go ahead and say this to you. And he said something that could have, one of those snippets from the past. And I said, son, I can hear that and it not be a threat because I've owned it. I've owned it. Okay? Sometimes when God's about to do a huge work in your life, like that night in my office, you don't get a big neon sign or a 60-day notice that God is about to send you a very painful message that you need to hear. Just warning you. Something big is coming. That letter brought me to a critical fork in the road. is here. On one hand, doubling down, resisting change, and resisting the faithful voice of God and the voice of my daughter that God was using to intervene in my life. By the way, don't get stuck on the surface of healing. Well, that's really messy and she shouldn't have done that. Doesn't she respect you as her dad? Oh, healing is so messy. Emotions are so messy. And if that's all the further you ever get, well, when you can talk to me in a different way.
It's good, Don. Good, Don.
I get to go on to my other job after this. And boy, was I was doubling down. For 3 days, I was doubling down. God will reveal to you who you are at your core, but his healing will depend on how you respond. God doesn't just download healing into our lives. He doesn't just download healing into our wounded relationships. We are spiritual, psychological, physical, and social being. And when we are hurt in the relational aspect of our life, that's exactly where we're going to have to be healed. And so for you to go around telling people, well, I prayed about what I did, and I just feel like God has given me the victory over that, and we can move on, and don't blame them for feeling like, woohoo, I'm right over here. Nice you've talked to God about it. You hurt me. Oh, man, that spiritual bypass of just that kind of that, well, yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm so glad that grace covers the past. Well, yeah, and it'll heal the past, but first you have to go back, maybe leave your gift at the altar, go be reconciled to your brother, and then come back to the altar.
Good truth, Don. God help us. God help us.
I have just really strong feelings about that spiritual bypass stuff. Martha, I'd like for you to come. See, it won't be GBS if I don't get Martha to come, you know. So this is my pay this morning. Martha gets to come to the organ, you know, because we logged millions of miles, or maybe literally. And in just a minute, we're going to sing what Martha's going to start playing, but I want to tell you this, a 72-hour window from the time that I sat over there in that office and read that email, a 72-hour window of spiritual warfare followed Amber's letter to me. Oh, God knew what was at stake. I think the adversary knew what was at stake. Boy, was I being weighed in the balance. Three days of Amber prayerfully waiting as her stunned dad picked through the pieces of that emotional bomb. But at the end of those 3 days, there were three of us on the telephone line. I was sitting in a dark bedroom. By the grace of God, he melted my heart. Amber and me and the Holy Spirit, as we worked through the letter and our hearts were melted together. Now don't let me leave you with this impression that in 72 hours, no. I can't even begin to tell you the journey. Sometimes the loneliness, the confusion, the disillusionment of total family healing. But I can stand before you today with integrity and tell you, by the grace of God, God has helped me to be intentional about not just making a drive-by apology, but changing the culture of our family, and it's still changing. We're still healing. I'm still healing from my childhood. I don't lay a bunch of gobbledygook on you, but that's just the truth. I'm still healing from what I grew up in. My kids are still healing from what they grew up in. And we're all on a journey now that's redemptive, restorative. My daughter started a convention. My son's involved in it too. And one of the questions they get behind the scenes is, how does your mom and dad, what are they doing? Because people know our story. How are they with this? Well, because God has called us to turn around and face the truth and face change. And as God does, he's rewarded us beautifully for doing that. All right? Something beautiful, something good will come out of your story. Get support. Don't try this at home. Get support. Then get more support. Don't go write a letter today. I did that one time. It backfired. And I thought it was just such a beautiful letter. It was just going to connect. It caused more problems. If you have a letter to write, run it by about 4 people with a gob of wisdom. I know I need to be done, but let me just say this. Some of the very traits that get some of us into the mess we're in, where we need forgiveness, are the very things we try to use to get out of it. Well, if I cause pain, then I roll up my sleeves and I'll do something about it. I'll fix it. I'm going to fix it, you know. No, you're not. Not that way. God is going to go after your faulty conflict resolution skills. No more impulsiveness. Yeah, wait on me. Yeah, learn something about divine timing. Learn something about how to clear yourself. Okay? Because you get to get changed in the middle of all this, okay? All right. Something beautiful. Something good. All my confusion, he understood. Oh, believe me, all I had to offer him was brokenness and strife. He made something beautiful of my life. Now I want us to sing that one last time, but I want us to force the word in instead of he made something. He's making something. Making. He'll be putting the last touch on you right before you go to heaven. Something beautiful, something good. beautiful of my life. Yes, He's making something beautiful of my life.
Thank you, Brother Don, for that beautiful word today. God's used them to communicate truth today. And so I pray that we will not be resistant to what the Spirit is saying to us, but that we would respond. And perhaps for some of you, you need to go and find a piece of paper and write down what it is that you're going to do as a result of what you've heard today. Maybe it's as simple as, I'm going to listen to this again. Some of you need to make a note in your phone. But don't let the truth of what was conveyed today slip through your fingers like sand. This is something you'll need today. It's something you'll need tomorrow. It's something I needed to hear today. And so take it. Make it actionable in your life. And God will bless you for it. Father, thank you for Brother Don's vulnerability today. Lord, I pray that perhaps you would just pull back the curtains of eternity for a moment and let him glimpse the kind of impact this will have long term. Thank you for his faithfulness. Lord, I pray for the students, staff, and faculty here today who needed to hear this. I pray, Father, that you would take what was given and you would help us to, Lord, not think of others that need this truth, and help us not to pray for others to apply the truth. But Lord, would you help me to look life square in the face and do what is necessary as a result. Go with us now, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you.